Indahnya negeri ini dengan hasil bumi yang melimpah. Dari hasil bumi, kita bertransaksi. Bertransaksi, jual, dan beli. Pasar adalah tempat kita berbagi rezeki. Tempat terjadinya denyut ekonomi. Penuh dengan informasi dan silaturahmi. Hasilnya bisa kita nikmati. Kesejahteraan masyarakat harus didukung keuangan yang sehat. Karena itu, perbankan sangat penting bagi industri keuangan nasional. Kepercayaan nasabah merupakan faktor utama dalam industri perbankan. Melalui fungsi intermediasi perbankan yang mendukung pembangunan nasional, dari hulu hingga hilir ke seluruh lini hingga ke pelosok negeri, LPS hadir sebagai lembaga yang melindungi nasabah dan mendukung stabilitas sistem perbankan melalui program penjaminan dan resolusi. LPS turut serta memelihara stabilitas perbankan dalam pembangunan nasional demi kesejahteraan Indonesia di masa yang akan datang. Dari kita, untuk kita. LPS, aman, tenang, pasti.
Hi everyone, good afternoon. Welcome to this year's TPN International Class session. Before we start, I just want to make sure that my audio and my visual is working. So let me know if you guys can hear me by maybe sending a hi in the chat or sending an emoticon. Can everyone hear me? Thank you. So while waiting for more people to come into the session, I just want to thank you all for being here. But while waiting for everyone, I just want to introduce the session, and I want to introduce what TPN is and what we do here. So TPN is short for Temu Pendidik Nusantara, which is an annual conference since 2014. And it brings together educators like teachers, principals, supervisors, educational activists, foundations, just anyone within the realm of education. And there are many TPN events, such as the Kelas Kemerdekaan, which is an independency class, and there's a career class, there's a competency class, and there is this class, which is the international class. So the international class, the aim of it is to bring together educators all around the world to share their knowledge about what they think is best for teaching and learning, just teaching and learning together. Now, from TPN, we want to give a big thank you to our partners, Yayasan Guru Belajar, Cerita Guru Belajar, Kampus Guru Cikal, Kampus Pemimpin Merdeka, and Teach First Indonesia. And we also want to thank our partners, Lembaga Penjamin Simpanan, LPS, Wardah, and NutriFood. Again, I just want to say if everyone can hear me, please let me know in the chat. And everyone who's coming in right now, if you guys want to introduce yourselves and say where you're from or where you're watching this from, that would be really welcome, so we can all just interact with each other and have a really nice session. Selamat sore, good afternoon. Selamat sore, Pak Rizky. Good afternoon. So for today's session, we will be having two speakers, Mr. Putra Lumi from the UK and Miss Ling from Singapore. And before I give a more detailed introduction on both our wonderful speakers, I just want to ask everyone here if they find any parts or quotes interesting, feel free to screenshot and post it on your social media with the hashtag bergerak untuk berdampak and mention at Temu Pendidik Nusantara. Now, hello, Mr. Putra Lumi. Hi, Miss Jelling. These are our wonderful speakers for today.
Hello, everyone. Hi, Miss Jelling. It's a pleasure to be here. Am I audible?
Hi, everyone. I can hear you.
All right, thank you.
Nice to meet you. Do I call you Joel?
Either way is okay, Putra or Joel.
Nice to meet you, Putra.
Thank you, Aditya.
Let us know if you can hear us, guys. Now, let me introduce everyone to our first speaker, which is
Hello,
Mr. Putra Joel Lumi. Now, Mr. Putra, or may I call you Mr. Putra or Mr. Joel?
That's fine. Either way is okay.
Mr. Putra. So Mr. Putra here, he has more than 5 years of experience working in the education sector, and he specializes in curriculum development, debating, reporting, and analysis. Wow, very, very clever, very smart. And he just finished his master's degree in educational studies, focusing on educational policy, funded by Chevening Scholarship from the UK government. And for today, Mr. Putra's presentation will be about educational inclusion, about the struggles for change, about the potential for emancipation in education, and establishing the framework to discuss issues about exclusion. And I think that's all from me. Mr. Putra, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Aditya. Thank you for having me. Hi, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. So can the moderator share the screen for me? Thanks very much. Appreciate. Okay, so as the moderator mentioned earlier, my name is Putra. You can call me Putra. I just finished my master's degree in educational studies, focusing on educational policy. So I got a Chevening scholarship from the UK government. So on this occasion, I'm going to talk about some of my experience, to share about some of my experience that I observed and learned through the lens of Scottish education curriculum, or the Scottish education system, about the inclusion in education. That is why my title for today's presentation would be Inclusion in Education, Possibility or Fantasy. So next. Okay, let's start with an imagination. Imagine a world where entrepreneurs or businessmen, as you can see on the screen here, are the only people who work in this world. Everyone works to become an entrepreneur or businesswoman or businessman. In this scenario, what do you think will happen? Think about what your life would be if this happened. Next. In the second scenario, think about a world where full of people who have different jobs, who have different passion, who have different professions. What do you think would happen in this second scenario? Next. Based on the two scenario that I've mentioned earlier, which of the two situation above do you like better? Just type on the chat or on the comment section. It will be helpful for me. We must all know that the second scenario that I mentioned earlier is where we definitely want it to be. And whether we realize it or not, sometimes as teachers, we are actually in a position to change the world by doing our profession or our noble job. But it turns out that whether we know it or not, also, the way we've been living, the way we've been teaching so far seems to be making children or students like those in the first scenario. Why do you think so? Next. That's kind of a brief introduction about my presentation today about inclusivity or about the inclusion in education itself. So at this time, on this occasion, I'm going to talk about inclusion in education. I'll share some basic ideas or fundamental concept and provide best practices or good practices that are taught about during my master degree in the UK here. I'm going to talk also about what I've seen, what I've observed here happen when these ideas of inclusivity are put into practice into the real world. I also understand, we also realize that the idea of inclusiveness, quote unquote, is very big, is very general. So 20 minutes isn't enough for me to talk about the details. So the goal of my presentation today is just to get teachers to talk about whether or not this idea of being inclusive in your classroom or in your school has become a part. So it's kind of provocations, hopefully. Next. I'm gonna ask you, do you agree with this statement? Inclusion is only about students with special needs. Just put your comments below on your on your comment section. Just say if you do, yes I do, or no I don't agree with the statement. Inclusion is only about students with special needs. Do you agree or not agree?
There's no
Well,
right or wrong, guys. You can just speak your opinion freely.
correct. How about you, Aditya? How do I call you? Aditya, Fatira, or
Tala, Tala. Just Tala is nice.
Oh, Tala. Hi, Tala.
For
What do you think about the statement?
For me, I think inclusion is more than just about students with special needs. I think inclusion is just you welcome anyone who's different, even if like what they need from education or from the world around them might be different from you. You still welcome them and you try to accommodate to them, and they try to accommodate to you.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you, Tala. Well, agree with you, because the understanding of inclusion itself in education has transcended the assumption that inclusion is about students with special needs. However, it actually concerns that inclusion of all children. Well, I just realized that one of the things people might get wrong, or us teachers might get wrong with this kind of idea about inclusion. No matter what system, quote unquote, we use, like the education system, all children matter, right? No matter what their background is, like race, ethnicity, or social status background, or whatever it is, they all matter and should be included in our system. It's because of people used to think that inclusion in education was only about, as mentioned in the statement here, or is only about students with special needs. But now people have to shift or change the way they think, their paradigm, their mindset. That it's really about making sure that all children are included in our system or in our society. Next. if you see the picture here, the steps here, the pictures here shows how different our society, our community, and even school and classroom settings are. When we understand or realize the concept of inclusion, the next step is to make the concept of belonging or the concept of inclusion itself become a part of our thinking process in our mind. It's because of the minds of being inclusive to everyone is kind of a requirement or prerequisite for getting to the next stage, which is the belonging stage, or which is the belonging dimension. The question now is why belonging is so important. Next. As you can see in the diagram here, yeah, why belonging is so important. Belonging is where all ideas meet, whether it's inclusion, whether it's equity, whether it's diversity. It's in the diagram say that the belonging stage engages full potential of the individual, where innovation thrives and views and beliefs and values are integrated together. So it's, for me, it's kind of difficult. It's kind of very important in our society and in our mindset as well. The main focus of my presentation is how people understand the idea of mindset of inclusion. This is because at the end of the day, if the inclusion approach will have been implemented very well at the grassroots level, everyone, I think, will feel like they belong to the community or the organization. In this case, the school and the classroom itself. But the next question is, why do we have to belong to certain community or certain classroom or school? Next, please. If we can see the research here, one of the OECD PISA studies, which came in 2000, said that sense of belonging and participation are important schooling outcomes that deserve attention in nearly every country participating in PISA. However, Alan et al., after 20 years later, did a research and found out that increasing number of students worldwide report not feeling a sense of belonging to their school. If we look at the years that have already passed, as you can see, this sense of belonging is still very important, essential in our society. It doesn't take much time, actually. I'm sure that this sense of belonging will still be important in the near future, as long as people still live in a group base or in a community base. So I think that in such a community base like school, classroom, the sense of belonging is an essential element or essential factor for both teachers and students themselves. Next. An interesting research based on inquiry undertaken by the Art Pacific and UCL in 2020. These are the benefits of belonging actually. A sense of belonging has been linked to some benefits. First, increase student motivation, increase staff well-being, motivation and retention, reduction in student absenteeism, improve academic achievement, and a growing sense of agency in students and staff. If we look this the benefits of belonging here, it's really beneficial for our classroom. Next. The interesting part of the research that has been undertaken by the UCL and things like that, and the organization research, they have been grouped some ideas into 3 related themes, as you can see here. They are doing this to show how different parts of what schools do and how the people in those schools relate to each other are linked. Schools here meaning the participants in this research. This method show how important it is for the whole school to have practices that everyone understands and agrees one another. If we look at the diagram below here, we can see the dimension of belonging can take place. The first one is the leadership aspect that will shape culture at the end of the day. If we pay attention to it, because the right leadership, we all agree with this, a culture will form at the end of the day. For example, like school leaders are going to are trying to create a culture that they really want it to be? Or what about us as educators or as a teachers? As teachers, we play a big part in making sure that the classroom has the right atmosphere, right? So since the teacher is the leader of the class, that is why I believe that a culture of inclusion will not happen if the people who in charge, um, in this case, school leaders or the teachers, don't think that way. Otherwise, if you can see here, if the leadership and the culture dimension have been shaped and implemented very well at the grassroots level, then the agency and belonging itself will likely to be shaped as well. For instance, like if students use the idea of inclusiveness to learn about the differences and potential of their peers, of their friends in a class setting, it will directly, I believe, shape their behavior in a way that helps them understand and get along with each other. Next. So the next question is, how do we do that? Circle, it stands for Child Inclusion Research into Curriculum Learning Education, established by the Scottish government, provide another way to think about inclusive practice. So circles basically offers a research base. They did a massive qualitative research to help teachers gain information about what the best universal practice is for including everyone in school settings. They mentioned that when we see a child, when we see a need, and when we are looking for the way to help, Circle tells us that what we should do is first, we need to think about the physical and social environment adaptations, meaning our school or our classroom. Second, that we need to making sure that routines, structures and routines are very clear and easy to follow. Also, we need to make sure that a task or activity is intrinsically motivating, which means that students should know why they are expected to do something and that is important to them. In other words, the student skills shouldn't be worked on until all of these things are in place together, like the environment, structure, and routines, and motivation. So I believe that Circle provides a good place for schools to get information and help about how to meet the needs of the learners. So I encourage all the teachers here, maybe to probably to go to the Circle website, learn about inclusive practice that have been established, that have been found based on the research, but in the UK context. Next. So I'm going to share about some of the best practices in Scots education system that I had the privilege to learn, observe, and deep dive. Yeah. In some Scottish schools about how they implement the inclusion policy itself. So based on the principle, next. Oh, here is one of the school improvement plan from the Rose Hall Academy School in Glasgow, UK. So next, if you can see here, it's kind of school improvement plan, and one of the quality indicator that I'm going to notice to you, next please, is the inclusion and equalities. So this is the way how the school leaders try to shape the culture of the school or of the community. They're trying to make that everyone understand the inclusion and equalities. At the end of the day, they think, as you can see on the document here, the staff will feel more confident in their understanding and implementation of nurture principles. How did they do that? First, they need to establish nurture provision, or they need to establish the mindset of inclusion within the framework of their school curriculum. Second, they have to provide some kind of program or some kind of teacher professional development. But also, they believe that through teachers learning community within the community of the school is really beneficial also for the teachers. It's because of it provides more constructive feedbacks for the teachers. It provides a room or a space for teachers to chat with each other, to learn from each other best practices. So it's a positive relationship actually at the end of the day. Next. So these are the inclusion principles in Rose Hall Academy. First, learning can take place anywhere. 1,278 students equals to 1,278 individual learning pathways. All students are individuals. All students are capable. All students have support needs. And the last, our school is served by a strong, capable, and diverse community. If you can see here, the school leaders established the inclusion principle first, putting those words together so that all the staff, all the member of the community in the school will try to proliferate, try to digest the meaning of inclusion itself. Next. So, well, it's because of the principle that I mentioned earlier. It's very clear that the school has a lot of different departments for the different kinds of students' learning needs. If you look at the bottom row here, you will see that roles are made by and for students alone, like the peer mediators, mentors in violence prevention, prefects, pupil, parliament, mental health ambassadors, and also bodies. Because I think that they also believe that the peer influence provides significant effect towards students' development stage or towards students' learning attainment. In the end, students will feel that diversity is very real and needs to be embraced and needs to be empowered. And this is, I think, a real way or a concrete example for a school to support inclusion and support network. Next. So it's because of in Rose Hall Academy, they accepted not only students from Scotland who speak English, but also from other region as well. So English has become a main issue also in this school community. So in order to provide support for the students who is English is not their first language in their home, they provide some kind of languages curriculum. Next. If you can see here, this is a concrete activity, how the school provides students with the language program, like the transition to and through Russell Academy, is all curriculum, language support, cultural inclusion, beyond tokenism, linguistic inclusion, and so on and so forth, including but not limited to anti-racist education, working with wider EAL community. So it's kind of concrete example how the school trying to provide additional support needs for the students. So it's because of language can become a trigger for the students, for the community to have some kind of racist what should I say issue. So they think that the best way to minimize the impact is to provide like language curriculum or language learning pathways for the marginalized quote unquote students. Next. Interestingly, this school not only teaches about diversity within the school community, but also the diversity in the community or society surrounding the school or the neighborhood, to be precise. As a result, like there are community service programs such as the green sustainable programs that are carried out to directly introduce diversity within their neighborhood. If you can see here, also the context of the school is very diverse in terms of religion, race, ethnicity, belief, social background. So Refugee Week, Black Lives Matter campaign, Ramadan, and etc. Are among the campaign programs that are implemented in this school. Next. As I mentioned earlier, that
Mr.
interestingly,
Putra, I'm
okay,
very sorry. Do you think you could finish your presentation in 2 minutes or 3 minutes?
okay,
Or
less than 1 minute.
okay.
Okay, as I mentioned earlier, that the Russell Academy is very diverse in terms of any backgrounds. That is why, like, they provide some kind of community venue for students to learn directly, introduce diversity within their neighborhood. So it's kind of positive relationship, not only within the school community, but also beyond the school, which is the community itself. Thank you.
Thank you for the presentation, Mr. Putra. That was actually really interesting. I did learn a lot, mostly about inclusion and how it's so much more than what I thought it was. I thought it was just like, if people are different, maybe we can learn to grow past it. But turns out it's much more layered than that. And I think it's a valuable thing to learn. Now, if you all have any questions, please feel free to leave them in the comment section of the live stream chat. And we will be going back to those comments during the Q&A session. Because right now, we are going to be meeting our next speaker. I'd like to introduce all of you to Miss Ling, or as she prefers to be called, Miss Ling. Hello, Miss Ling.
Hi, everyone. Selamat sore.
Cool. Now, Miss Ling works as the communications manager for WWF Coral Triangle program. Now, I used to be obsessed with WWF when I was a child. I think everyone who knew me when I was young knew I went through like a huge animal lovers phase. So I'm very excited to hear this presentation. And her presentation today will be about the Coral Triangle and the amazing work that she and her colleagues do on MPA, fisheries, marine plastic, turtles, and just all things about marine life. And that's all from me. Miss Ling, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Tala. And I hope that you will also still be excited about WWF even now. I'm just going to share my screen, and I may have to ask for your help to let me know if you can see the screen. I've just put it on slideshow, so I'm not sure whether you can see it.
We can see it. Well, I can see it, Miss Ling. If you guys can see it, please let Miss Ling know in the chats.
I'm not able to see the chat at the moment because I've just put in a presentation mode. So if anyone has problems, please let me know, and then I will pause. I just wanted to say thank you so much for this opportunity to share about the Coral Triangle. And thank you so much, Putra, for sharing, all your research and knowledge and insights into education inclusion, which is also something that, in a way, touches on what WWF would like to work on. Perhaps not in a traditional setting of schools, but I'll come to that later on why knowledge and capacity is such an important part of protecting the natural resources that we have. So a quick self-introduction. My name is Ling, and I've been working with WWF for over 8 years now. I'm the communications manager for the Coral Triangle program, and I'm based in Singapore, which is, I'll give you a clue, it's just right outside the Coral Triangle. But I'm also curious to know how many of you here know where or what is the Coral Triangle or have even heard of it. Maybe you can just type it in chat. I can't see the chat at this moment, my apologies, or you can maybe unmute yourself if you would like to speak. But a quick quiz maybe, and Tala, I may have to lean on you to let me know if there's any responses in the chat. Can anyone just name me a country that is in the Coral Triangle? This map is a bit of a clue for you. And I've just said that Singapore is not part of it, but very close.
It's okay to get it wrong, guys. We're all learning here.
Any brave souls would like to answer?
If no one, if like, perhaps I could go first, Miss
Yes,
Jelly.
please. Yeah.
To be fair, I did just read about the Coral Triangle right before we started this session, so I might be a bit rusty. But I think Indonesia is a part of it, isn't it?
Definitely. Indonesia is a big part of it. I mean, Indonesia has more than 10,000 islands. It's a huge archipelago, and it's a big part of this tiny triangle, which is, 6 million kilometers square. Sounds big, but it's actually only 1.2% of the world's surface area. So a really tiny part of the planet. And here's a map of what we mean by the triangle. And often people are like, where is the triangle? So if you look at the blue part, which looks to me more like a sotong, this is the bioregion. This is the biological area that scientists have come together to say, guys, this is, the most important biodiversity area for marine resources and marine life in the world. And it's right here. So of course, it includes 6 countries that are in the, that share these transboundary resources, and that's Malaysia, Indonesia, Tala, as you mentioned, Philippines is entirely part of it. You see that Indonesia's bioregion is mostly from Bali onwards, Timor-Leste, and Papua New Guinea, and Solomon Islands. So, but beyond these 6 countries, right, like there are a lot of countries that are also sharing these resources where the health or the unhealthiness of this area will impact and affect the countries around it, including my country, Singapore, or Thailand, Vietnam, China in Asia, or even Australia and other parts of Southeast Asia. So what is so special about the Coral Triangle? Why do scientists think this is the world center of marine biodiversity? So I want you to imagine if there's 100 different, marine species, life, big or small, from the whale to the plankton in the world, or this is the area where you have the highest diversity. I'll give you some examples. 76% of the world's coral species are found right here. And this is the richest part. You might have heard recently that we're losing corals to climate change, that corals are bleaching because of the warming and acidifying sea water because of climate change. Here is the area where we find some of the most resilient reefs in the world that can withstand high temperatures, that can rebound back, and that can be that must be protected, in order for the coral reefs to continue for the next few hundred years or even millennia. Here is also where more than a third of the world's coral reef fish species are here. So a lot of these reef fish species are the ones that end up on our plates in the markets, but also in ornamental fish trade. Importantly, I'm sure everyone here has had tuna. It's from your tuna cans to your very expensive sashimi. Out of the world's 8 tuna species, 6 are here. They either spawn here or they reproduce here. So this is a nursery for them this is an area where they come together. And I don't know about you, but I love turtles. And out of the world's 7 marine turtle species, 6 are already threatened with extinction, and they also call coral triangle as part of their home. A little more about why this is important to us people. So the coral triangle is just a marine space, right, with lots of marine resources. What's the big deal about it? With all these resources, they are driving a really important part of the economy for all 6 nations and beyond. For starters, there's at least 130 million people who are sustaining themselves based on the food that they fish or glean from the shores in the coral triangle. And we're not even talking about the jobs that people will have from maybe buying the fish at the market, buying or selling the fish, or trading the fish, or being involved in seafood trade, etc. So this is just 130 million coastal people who are directly reliant on it. Beyond that, when we look at reef and tuna fisheries annually, minimally, we're looking at $3 billion USD traded for exports from this region. So you can imagine how important it is for the economies of these countries here that are still developing. And I'm sure, when you think about holidays, interestingly, in a survey, out of holiday destinations that people like to go to, 7 out of 10 are beach destinations. And in fact, before COVID, 7 out of 10 of the most popular beach destinations include destinations in the Coral Triangle. And so it's not surprising that just based on nature-based and adventure tourism alone, we're looking at 20 to 25 billion in terms of annual revenue in the region. So it's a really rich area of resources, not just for wildlife or nature, but also for people who rely on it. But there is, of course, bad news, right? This is a beautiful place. It's really important, but we're also facing threats from extractive industries. So we're looking at perhaps sand mining or oil and gas drilling, or even, you might not be familiar with this yet, deep seabed mining, where people are exploring areas of the ocean that we have never touched before, where corals take hundreds of years just to grow a few cm, to try and mine for minerals and metals that go into our computers and handphones and batteries. So this is one of the key threats that we're facing. Unsustainable fisheries, from destructive fishing, trawl fishing, to overfishing. Fisheries is probably the biggest threat all oceans across the world are facing. And then, of course, undeniably, climate change is already here. We are already feeling the impacts. We are seeing more extreme weather events. Indonesia has not been spared from it. Philippines especially has been seeing a lot more typhoons than usual. Also aquaculture and sustainable aquaculture, where maybe fisheries are grown in mangroves or in areas where the fish feed is actually supporting destructive fisheries. And this plastic and marine pollution is something that I think each and every one of us has experienced, whether or not we have gone in diving or snorkeling. Even at the beach, even in rivers, you'll be able to see a lot of plastic and marine debris. And of course, something that we all, in a way, contribute to. And the good news is, if we contribute to it, we should be able to support the recovery from it, which is unsustainable tourism development. So these are just some of the threats that we have our eyes on and would like to work on. And I'll go through very quickly how we're working on that as WWF regionally. So in each of these countries, we have our national offices, but regionally, we've been supporting this area, Coral Triangle, for the last 15 years. But 15 years is not really long. And we know that our communities have been here a lot longer, and they have their traditional knowledge, and countries have data on their science. And we are looking at combining this knowledge and experience to protect the coral triangle towards the goals, which is one of it is to protect 30% of our marine areas by 2030. So what other things make the coral triangle special is that there's no other region, unlike EU and ASEAN, that is kind of like just for the topic of coral reefs, fisheries, and food security, that presidents and prime ministers have come together to basically create this committee, this permanent committee that will look into it. So in a way, it's a first in the world where 6 heads of states have come together in 2009 to say that we want to continuously look at how we can protect coral reefs, sustain fisheries, and improve food security in the region. And if you are in Indonesia and if you have been to Manado, you might have even seen this very interesting architecture that is owned by the KKP, and it's supposed to look a little bit like a coral reef or like a coral reef system. So it's very new age and like space-ish. So this is the CTI CFF, short for Coral Triangle Initiative on Coral Reefs, Fisheries and Food Security. And they have a permanent secretariat based in Manado, Indonesia, that speaks to the priorities that the 6 governments put in, which include social equity, gender responsiveness, and gender inclusion. So this is not just a government initiative. There are development partners, for example, WWF. There are collaborators like universities, and maybe in the future, even Temu, Pendidik Nusantara could be a partner, because a lot of it is about sharing knowledge and sharing experiences and insights. Now, when we're looking at how can we protect the coral triangle, this seemingly tiny space, but so complex, with so many different countries, languages, cultures. How do we do this? There's many ways, of course, but what I wanted to talk about today are 3 points, which is education and knowledge, how we might scale innovation, and importantly, how can we engage local communities, but also urban youths and supporters, teachers like yourselves. So our goal really, if I can get you to read this with me, is really looking at how we can restore and build out towards a resilient coral triangle. The idea is that ecological recovery is not the only game here. We need to think about people and nature as one system, and how our food security is intrinsically tied to whether we are able to take care of our natural resources, basically. So there are 4 areas, as Tala, you mentioned, that we want to focus on. And one of it is, of course, ensuring that MPA, sorry for the acronyms, which means Marine Protected Areas, and OECM means other effective conservation measures. So areas that may not be government marine protected areas. There could be a local village, a coastal village saying, I would like to protect this area with a seasonal closure of fisheries. And that can become formally recognized by the government and become an area of conservation measure in a very loose way. So one of the things that we want to work towards, and that the world has been talking about, is that it's important to protect 30% of the critical habitats. In this case, we're looking at marine areas, coastal areas. I do want to share some stories with you, but I know we're running short on time, so I will be focusing a little more on the last 2 topics, but I'll move on to fisheries. So when it comes to fisheries, we're also not just looking at recovering fishery population for the sake of it. Of course, it's important because it will affect us, but the idea is that we want fishery population to recover so that we can achieve food security for our communities. And the way we see that happening is through looking at blue finance, looking at restoring the health of tuna. I'm sorry if you can see my cat. He's just walking on the table. Excuse me. Yeah. So, and then plastic. Plastic is something that we all interface with, right? So we are looking at how can we scale innovations? How can we look at um, bringing all the actors together? Because there's not a silver bullet in a sense. You can't just say government's ultimately responsible only. You can't just say, well, we have to target the Coca-Colas of the world, the businesses. I think the key here is that these are very important and powerful actors, but we must not also forget that communities and schools or educators, innovators, ourselves can be part of the action. So one of the things that maybe you might have heard in a conference yesterday was about plastic smart cities. In a way, we are already piloting solutions in Bogor, Depok, Jakarta, and Bali. And we're also working with Bye Bye Plastics and Utopia. And I did want to share with you, I don't know if you can see some of the Instagram. If you can, whip up your phone right now and check out Bye Bye Plastics Instagram page or Utopia, I would highly encourage you to do so because they have a lot of learning and teaching resources on plastic pollution, and not just for teachers but also for youth leaders or students who are interested to get in touch with a group to learn more. Right, so I'm afraid we're running out of time, so I'll skip the video. And last but not least, we're also working on protecting sea turtles. There are many ways that we want to look at this, but a big part of it is trade. The demand for turtle shell, tortoise shell. You might, if you have any antiques at home, you might see some spectacles that have the old school tortoise shell design. And these days, the tortoiseshell design is still very popular. It's a nice design, but most of the time, what you would see is that it's made from plastic. The problem is when tourists travel, especially to this part of the world or to Latin America, they don't know whether they're buying real tortoise shell, which will then support the trade of sea turtles, the killing and trade of sea turtles, which are already critically endangered, or are they buying plastic? So one of the things that we have started to work on with innovators is an app that has up to 95% accuracy. When you maybe see a bangle or like a comb that looks like a tortoise shell design, you can download this app, take a snapshot of it, and using AI technology, the app would be able to tell you with up to 95% accuracy whether or not it's plastic, which is something that you can then buy, or is it a tortoise shell product, which would then be illegal. So if you have your phone next to you, again, do check out the Seashell app. It's called SEE, S-E-E, as in the ability to see. And because the more people take photos of items and upload to the system, the more the AI technology learns. And for any teachers in the room, I'll be sharing with you some resources that the WF Network has. For example, there is a Wild Classroom that has several different resource guides, and one of it is about sea turtles. And if you haven't already heard about Earth Hour and you're interested in becoming part of a social movement, young and old, that's definitely one of the groups that I will encourage you to check out. You can also search for them on Instagram. I will just go very quickly to the Instagram later on. So Earth Hour Indonesia communities are very much self-organized. Earth Hour was an idea that first sparked by WWF, but it's very much a democratic movement now where towards the Earth Hour event, which is the last Saturday, I think it's the third Saturday of every March, a lot of communities come together to organize events, raise awareness, raise funds, or even push for policies from a local to even national level in the name of supporting our planetary health and protecting nature. Yeah, so I do want to come to this resources page so that And maybe anyone who's looking out for resources, feel free to take a screenshot of this. I could also send Tala the links of this that she could then share with you if you're interested. But for example, this is where WWF has their Wild Classroom teaching resources. And this is WWF Philippines teaching guide or learning resources. And you can find out more about Marine Buddies or Earth Hour Buddies on their Instagram. And also be sure to check out Plastic Smart Cities. I have also a free digital copy of the Panda Junior magazine, which is produced by WWF Singapore about the Coral Triangle in PDF format. And if you're keen to receive it via email, you can maybe, I'm not sure how to arrange this, but maybe share your email address and I can send it to you. Yeah, and that's about it from me. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you, Miss. Thank you, Miss Ling. That was a very interesting presentation, and for me, especially for my 8-year-old self, who was a big fan of sea turtles. And it actually made me very sad to learn that a lot of sea turtle species are endangered. I didn't know that before. I think your presentation raised awareness on a lot of really important things that speak to the inner child in all of us. I think we all went through an animal's phase at some point. And before we start the Q&A session, because I'm already seeing a lot of very interesting comments, before we start the Q&A session, a word from our sponsors.
Indahnya negeri ini dengan hasil bumi yang melimpah. Dari hasil bumi, kita bertransaksi. Bertransaksi, jual, dan beli. Pasar adalah tempat kita berbagi rezeki. Tempat terjadinya denyut ekonomi. Penuh dengan informasi dan silaturahmi. Hasilnya bisa kita nikmati. Kesejahteraan masyarakat harus didukung keuangan yang sehat. Karena itu, perbankan sangat penting bagi industri keuangan nasional. Kepercayaan nasabah merupakan faktor utama dalam industri perbankan. Melalui fungsi intermediasi perbankan yang mendukung pembangunan nasional, dari hulu hingga hilir, ke seluruh lini, hingga ke pelosok negeri, LPS hadir sebagai lembaga yang melindungi nasabah dan mendukung stabilitas sistem perbankan melalui program penjaminan dan resolusi. LPS turut serta memelihara stabilitas perbankan dalam pembangunan nasional demi kesejahteraan Indonesia di masa yang akan datang. Dari kita, untuk kita. LPS, aman, tenang, pasti.
Saya penjual batik. Awalnya saya nggak pernah nyimpan uang di bank. Semua keuntungan saya simpan di toko. Kalau di rumah ya saya simpan di bawah bantal. Semenjak kena kebakaran, uang saya hangus semua sampai ludes. Habis. Semenjak itu, saya sadar saya harus nabung di bank, nyimpen uang di bank. Ya, biar aman dan tentram. Ya, pastinya bank kita ya harus ada yang jamin, ya toh?
Simpanan Anda di bank dijamin hingga 2 miliar rupiah.
And hello everyone, we are back. Now, as I said before, if anyone has any questions for either of the speakers, please feel free to leave it in the chat, and our speakers as well, I will answer, as well as myself. I will help to the best of my abilities. Oh, here is a question from Dewa Gedenata Raditya. Considering the impending threats of inflation and our lack of access to food, it's a big problem in Indonesia right now. Ms. Ling, do you think we can improve our region's food security by protecting the biodiversity of our coral reefs? Like, do you think if we protected our reefs better, our food source would also be better? What do you think, Ms. Ling?
Hi, Tala, and hi, Gade. That's a fantastic and really important question. Absolutely, I think protecting biodiversity, not just in our reef systems, but also mangroves, seagrass, or even the idea of ridge to reef. Basically, for example, if you're just protecting your coral reefs without protecting your mangroves, at some point it's going to have a knock-on effect on the reef. So it has to be looked at as a system. And even the 10 kilometers towards the inland, what's the agricultural situation there? How much runoff is coming from agriculture into the sea that's going to affect the reefs, etc. So it's a whole system, and I think protecting biodiversity is definitely connected to food security. At the same time, another layer of it is how can we look at policies creating enabling environment to protect biodiversity. Oftentimes, it's easy to conceptualize and say, oh, I want to protect nature. But for a lot of, as you mentioned, lack of access to food or increasing rates of poverty, let's say if I'm a fisher and I have now a lack of resources, my financial situation has maybe worsened because of COVID. What I would want to do then is to catch more fish so that I can sell it. The idea is that if I catch more fish and I sell more of it, then I'll have more money to support my family and children. But often that could lead to destructive fishing practices. So what policies or what are some of the things we could do then to support fishers in such a way that they can earn more money per fish caught rather than being only receiving very little money for the fish that ultimately we pay quite a lot of money to, and a lot of that money is in a way lost to maybe inefficiencies or middlemen. So it's a systemic approach that we want to look at, but biodiversity is definitely a key part of it.
That's a really interesting answer, Miss Jialing. Yeah, I've always thought that, I don't think fishermen make a lot of money from the fish they catch. A lot of the money goes to any agencies or big companies that they work for, and that's not fair to the fishermen and also definitely not fair to the fish. So does anyone have any more questions? And again, guys, it's okay to ask in Indonesian. Nggak apa-apa kalau mau nanya dalam bahasa Indonesia. Nanti bisa saya bantu translate.
I see there's a question from is it Christina?
Oh, I think the WWF presentation really resonated with a lot of the Indonesians in the chats. I see someone here talking about the Ciliwung River, Grace Sarah Octavina. So, Ms. Jialing, if you don't know, the Ciliwung River is a river in Indonesia. It currently holds the title of the world's most polluted river, which is definitely not a title we're proud of. And WWF did a collaboration with our government to help clear a lot of the trash in the river. As of right now, it's still polluted, but it's definitely in a lot better state than it was. And I think here what a lot of the chat is trying to say is that the WWF plays a big part in education because a lot of like educational places like schools, foundations are near like, vulnerable areas, like the schools near Ciliwung and the schools near the coast and the sea. So your programs will definitely be helpful for those kind of schools.
Thank you. And I did also want to pick up one of the questions that was asked about working with schools in coastal areas, which I think is really interesting because, when Putra, you were discussing about inclusion in education, one of the first things I thought about was also inclusion or exclusion by virtue of social economic status, but also access to even having a school in the first place, or access to educational systems. And I think at least in what I've learned from my field team, a lot of the coastal communities in the Coral Triangle, including in Indonesia, are so far off from governance, right, and from infrastructure, that they don't necessarily receive the standard education that a lot of students or young children growing up will receive. And I'm just wondering, how does that figure from your point of view, Putra, on I like how you talk about belonging and leadership and how that shapes social behavior.
Well, agree with you. Well, it's interesting to see your presentation, how you're so passionate with the environmental issues and how you work with the WWF with the Coral Triangle issues in Coral Triangle area. Well, I remember, I think I took part with the CTI Summit back in 2009 in Manado when I was younger. It's because of, it's part of the CTI Summit. So I took part as a volunteer in that program.
That's amazing. You've come full circle.
I know. I think it was really enjoyable moment at the same times, but also interesting to learn from the policymakers how they try to mingle with the coastal society, but also try to adjust all the policy things, trying to tackle the issue related to the environmental things. So speaking of the inclusion in education, especially about the, well, as I mentioned earlier, like inclusion is very broad, it's very general, but I'm going to address about the exclusion from the resources itself, or the exclusion from the seeing that it's a real problem. It's very problematic issue, but we need to think systematically, holistically about how to solve this kind of problem. So I think the best way for the school leaders or for the teachers to know the context, just to provoke the students with some issues or problems, so that they can think about that and then they can execute with the project maybe, or beyond that they can like create some innovative projects, collaborating maybe with the WWF, or making some initiatives that I believe it will enhance or proliferate the idea, or to proliferate the issue of Coral Triangle itself.
Thank you, Putra. Yeah. I did want to share also, I didn't have a chance to add that in my presentation, that in how we look at securing the protection or effective management of MPAs, as Gede asked about protecting biodiversity, how might we do that? is that we realize it can become a easy thing. It's never easy to just say, oh, now, this area is a marine protected area. And then that's it. It's on paper. So we call them paper parks, right? But ultimately, there is no capacity to actually protect these parks, or there's no engagement of the local community to understand what does it mean when it's a protected area? Where can we fish? And why can't we fish here? And so what we realize is a big gap is in education in a very broad sense of adults, education of adult decision makers at a local level, your village leaders, community leaders, education of marine park officers who maybe I'm from Java and then I've been posted to Sulawesi and I'm like, oh, I don't understand this place at all, and there's a lot of learning and capacity by our officials who are stewarding and guiding us towards these protections. So a big part of it is cracking that code on how can we build the capacity of our stakeholders, of people who are meant to help support the protection of these places, which would include not just government, but also local businesses and communities, importantly.
Oh, here we have another question from Gede again. So Gede wants to know, can we make education inclusive? But what if a person came from a family where where inclusivity wasn't enforced? So can we bring that person into inclusivity in the education system if they come from a place where maybe inclusivity isn't a thing?
Okay, it's really a provocation question actually. What I mean is that it's also the purpose of my presentation today is all about trying to trigger all the policymakers, all the teachers, all the school leaders out there who are watching this session to think inclusively about their environment or their society. It's because I think we all agree that it's the responsibility of all who work with children to respond appropriately to their needs. That's the main purpose, or that's the main mindset should we have. And we need also to realize or consider our context. Do they really understand about the inclusive principle itself? If not, it's our job to generate the idea of inclusion principle itself. It's because of I think, and we all also agree that the inclusion approach not only allows children or all young people to thrive in their community, but also contribute to all children and young people's understanding and appreciation of diversity, and helps them to build a more just society. If this principle have been embedded within their mindset, I think it will be beneficial, or it will be easier for us to execute those kind of inclusive practice. But then, as I mentioned earlier, we need to create the culture itself. If we think that the culture is not in the community, we need to empower them to know about the inclusion principle first.
That's a really good answer. So how I understand it is that we need to be inclusive even to people who don't know what inclusivity is, so that they may learn it, and they may be inclusive to the people around them, and they may spread that inclusivity. That's a really positive outlook on life. Thank you, Mr. Putra. And so thank you. Does anyone have any more questions? So if there are no more questions, I would like to thank everyone here for joining us today. And I would especially like to thank Ms. Ling and Mr. Putra for your presentations. I think you all gave very different perspectives on what ultimately is the same cause. We want to make the world a better place. for the environment and for ourselves. And it's really interesting to hear like different perspectives and your different work on it. And I think what we learned today, we can apply it in the classroom. We can apply it, we can teach it to how kids can treat each other. I learned so much today, and I'm sure that the viewers did as well. I'm sure that even the operators also did learn a lot. And thank you so much for your presentations. And again, I'd love to invite everyone who attended this session. If you learned anything interesting, if you want to upload it to social media, please feel free to do so. And with that, I would like to conclude this session. Thank you so much to everybody for coming, and I hope to see you all again. Not just all of you viewers, but also maybe Ms. Jia Ling and Mr. Putra. I hope to see you both again in next year's Temu Pendidik Nusantara International class. This is Kak Tala, signing off.
Thank you so much, Tala. Thank you, Putra.
Dengan pengumuman ini, maka pengurus bank diminta agar tidak meninggalkan Indonesia guna penyelesaian likuidasi.
Pada tahun 1997 hingga 1998, badai krisis moneter dan perbankan menghantam Indonesia. Masyarakat berbondong-bondong antri di bank dan ATM untuk menarik dana mereka.
Presiden meminta Menteri Keuangan sama Gubernur BI untuk mengambil langkah-langkah menghadapi permasalahan ini di perbankan. Bank yang sudah tidak bisa ditolong, tutup aja. Bank yang masih bisa diselamatkan, ya apakah harus merger atau langkah-langkah lain supaya dibantu. Nah itu nanti bulan November itu dicabut izin 16 bank.
Kekacauan terjadi di mana-mana. Situasi chaos ini disebabkan hilangnya kepercayaan dari masyarakat terhadap perbankan. 16 bank saat itu kolaps.
Wah ini bagaimana? Uang saya hilang. Bayangkan kalau orang waktu itu uangnya ratusan juta aja udah besar sekali. Sehingga bulan Desember itu ada surat dari Mensesnek ya, kepada BI dan Menteri Keuangan untuk membantu. Eksplisit disebutkan keluarkan BLBI, bantuan likuiditas Bank Indonesia. Itu Desember itu.
Berdasarkan pengalaman pahit atas tumbangnya 16 bank, Undang-Undang Nomor 10 Tahun 1998 tentang perbankan dikeluarkan.
Saya melihat BPPN itu selalu babak belur berhadapan kalau diadu dengan Undang-Undang KUH Perdata. Saya kemudian bilang, saya mau untuk membangun LPS itu dengan undang-undang. Nggak mau saya dengan PP. Gitu.
Pada 22 September 2004, Undang-Undang Republik Indonesia Nomor 24 tentang Lembaga Penjamin Simpanan disahkan. Berdasarkan undang-undang ini, LPS merupakan lembaga independen yang berfungsi menjamin simpanan nasabah penyimpan. Lembaga ini pun turut aktif dalam memelihara stabilitas sistem perbankan sesuai dengan kewenangannya. Setahun kemudian, tepatnya pada 22 September 2005, LPS resmi beroperasi.
Negara-negara lain juga masih mengalami krisis ya. Di Australia, perbankan juga, kemudian di Singapura, Malaysia, Hong Kong. Tapi terus terang waktu kita mendirikan LPS, kita banyak mengadap model dari inilah, Kanada gitu ya. Karena memang itu model yang cukup bagus lah itu diambil gitu ya, mengenai lembaga penjamin simpanan. Jadi waktu itu memang pemerintah tuh sudah menyiapkan ya kan undang-undang LPS. Saya ingat waktu saya di perasuransian di Kementerian Keuangan, tugas saya memang selain katakanlah melakukan pengawasan, juga tugas lainnya adalah diminta menyiapkan undang-undang LPS.
Major financial institutions have teetered on the edge of collapse, and some have failed.
Krisis keuangan yang berawal di Amerika Serikat pada tahun 2007, dampaknya mulai dirasakan ke seluruh dunia, termasuk negara-negara berkembang pada tahun 2008. Di Indonesia, imbas krisis keuangan tersebut mulai terasa terutama menjelang akhir 2008. Dampak krisis keuangan global yang paling terasa adalah ketatnya likuiditas di pasar uang antar bank. Penurunan harga saham yang tajam, potensi meningkatnya kredit bermasalah, serta derasnya aliran modal keluar yang menekan nilai tukar rupiah. LPS pun memasuki babak baru dalam pelaksanaan fungsinya, yaitu untuk menyehatkan kembali PT Bank Senturi Tbk. Upaya yang ditempuh nyatanya berbuah manis. Bank Senturi keluar dari status dalam pengawasan khusus oleh Bank Indonesia pada 11 Agustus 2009. Kinerja keuangan PT Bank Senturi pun terus diperbaiki, hingga memenuhi ketentuan tentang kesehatan bank. Pada akhirnya, sejak 3 Oktober 2009, Bank Senturi secara resmi berganti nama menjadi PT Bank Mutiara Tbk.
Pada tahun 2014, bulan November 20, kita lakukan RUPS LB, penjualan pengalihan saham dari LPS kepada pemenang, yaitu G-Trust dari Jepang. Ya. Perusahaan yang juga bergerak di bidang keuangan, yang mempunyai aktivitas investasi keuangan di luar Jepang, yang telah juga dinyatakan oleh OJK lulus dalam fit and proper test. Harga yang disepakati 4,4 triliun, ekuivalen dengan recovery rate 55%, ekuivalen dengan price to book ratio yang 3,2 kali. Ya. Jumlah ini 3,2 kali jauh di atas rata-rata price to book value dari jual beli perbankan di Indonesia yang 2 kali. Ya. Perlu kami sampaikan bahwa indemnity tidak diberikan oleh LPS. Kita menjual bank apa adanya tanpa mengakseptasi risiko-risiko yang muncul di kemudian hari.
Dalam perjalanannya, DPR dan pemerintah mengesahkan Undang-Undang Pencegahan dan Penanganan Krisis Sistem Keuangan atau PPKSK. Undang-undang ini memberikan mandat baru bagi LPS, terutama dalam penanganan krisis keuangan. Sidang Paripurna Dewan Perwakilan Rakyat pun menyetujui pengesahan Undang-Undang PPKSK secara aklamasi pada 17 Maret 2016 dan diundangkan pada 15 April 2016. Undang-Undang PPKSK juga memberikan kesempatan kepada LPS untuk masuk lebih awal ke dalam bank sistemik yang mengalami permasalahan solvabilitas. Langkah ini tentunya untuk menentukan resolusi penyihatan yang tepat.
Dengan sekarang disahkannya Undang-Undang PPKSK, peranan dan tantangan LPS menjadi semakin besar. Kalau pada saat yang lalu adalah betul-betul menjaga dan memberikan jaminan bagi simpanan masyarakat di perbankan, peranan LPS sekarang meningkat menjadi pelaksana program restrukturisasi perbankan.
LPS juga memperoleh metode baru dalam penanganan bank sistemik seperti halnya pengalihan sebagian atau seluruh aset dan kewajiban kepada bank lain atau disebut juga purchase and assumption. Kemudian, LPS dapat melakukan metode penggunaan bank perantara untuk menerima pengalihan sebagian atau seluruh aset dan kewajiban dari bank sistemik tersebut, serta penyertaan modal sementara yang telah diatur dalam Undang-Undang LPS. Undang-Undang PPKSK juga memberikan mandat kepada LPS untuk melaksanakan program restrukturisasi perbankan atau PRP dalam kondisi tertentu, seperti krisis sistem keuangan dan permasalahan sektor perbankan yang membahayakan perekonomian nasional.
Di dalam proses yang paling terakhir khususnya, itu perlu ada penguatan. Disinilah peran LPS, tugas dan wewenang LPS tidak lagi hanya sekedar menjamin simpanan masyarakat, tetapi juga memperkuat proses penanganan bank. Dan di dalam Undang-Undang PPKSK ini, tugas dan kewenangan LPS itu menjadi lebih luas. Dari sebelumnya hanya paybox plus menjadi juga sebagai otoritas di bidang resolusi bank.
Perkembangan sektor perbankan yang dinamis seiring dengan adanya kebutuhan internal membuat LPS melaksanakan program transformasi. Dengan latar belakang Undang-Undang PPKSK, program ini diawali dengan perubahan visi dan misi LPS. Visi LPS adalah menjadi lembaga yang terdepan, terpercaya, dan diakui di tingkat nasional dan internasional dalam menjamin simpanan nasabah dan melaksanakan resolusi bank untuk mendorong dan memelihara stabilitas sistem keuangan. Sedangkan misi LPS adalah berkomitmen untuk menyelenggarakan penjamin simpanan yang efektif dalam rangka melindungi nasabah, melaksanakan resolusi bank yang efektif dan efisien, melaksanakan penanganan krisis melalui restrukturisasi bank yang efektif dan efisien, dan berperan aktif dalam mendorong dan memelihara stabilitas sistem keuangan nasional. Berdasarkan data per Agustus 2021, jumlah rekening simpanan yang dijamin LPS telah mencapai di atas target, yaitu 99,92%, atau lebih dari 360 juta rekening. Angka ini melebihi target yang ditetapkan Undang-Undang LPS sebesar 90%.
Jadi sekarang saya tidak takut lagi buat nabung di bank yang lain dikarenakan ada penjamin yang namanya LPS.
Saya merasa senang. Ternyata benar-benar LPS menjaminnya 100%.
Alhamdulillah itu udah ada info dari bank, di bank itu sudah ditangani oleh LPS. Saya senang lah. Terima kasih kepada LPS.
LPS yang menjamin uang kita. Terima kasih LPS.
LPS bersama anggota KSSK, yakni Kementerian Keuangan, Bank Indonesia, dan OJK, melakukan koordinasi dan komunikasi secara intensif demi terciptanya sinergi kebijakan untuk menjaga stabilitas keuangan dalam rangka mendorong pemulihan ekonomi nasional.
Di usia 16 tahun ini, LPS berkomitmen untuk terus berinovasi dan memperbaiki diri karena kami sadar amanah yang diberikan dan tantangan yang kami hadapi semakin berat. Kami berkomitmen untuk menjaga kepercayaan nasabah perbankan melalui program penjaminan simpanan dan resolusi bank. Pada kesempatan ini, izinkan saya mengucapkan terima kasih kepada seluruh masyarakat Indonesia atas dukungannya kepada LPS. Kami juga mengapresiasi pemerintah, DPR RI, regulator, dan industri perbankan yang telah bekerja keras bahu-membahu dalam menjaga stabilitas sistem keuangan dan mendorong perekonomian nasional.